Napoleon signs orders like a man with unlimited time. Then, in the same night, he bets the entire future of his empire on one fragile assumption. If it's wrong, the army dies without a battle. By the end, you'll understand how Napoleon manufactured control under pressure, why people obeyed him even when the plan was reckless, and how a single night's psychology can steer an empire. Because when one person convinces everyone they're in control, thousands can march into disaster without realizing they were persuaded, not protected. Was Napoleon actually in control that night, or was he using the appearance of control to keep the machine moving while he gambled? It is dark, not poetic dark, practical dark. The kind that hides hills and hedgerows and men. Napoleon Bonaparte sits with a map under lamplight, and the paper looks calm. The world outside is not. In a few hours, he will gamble an empire on a choice that cannot be reversed. Not because he lacks information, but because he believes he can control what information means. He tells himself the same story he has told before, that the enemy will do what is rational, that the battlefield will behave like a system, that if he pushes here, the rest will follow, and then the event. A rider arrives with news. Prussians are moving, not somewhere far, not theoretically. On the map, their direction points like an accusation. Napoleon does not panic. He does something more dangerous. He tightens his grip on the plan. He stares at the map as if staring can make reality obey. He will decide where to place men, where to hold them back, where to pretend strength, and where to reveal it. By dawn, he will bet everything on control. But what happens when control is not a tool and becomes a need? This story is often told as pure strategy, as genius against odds, as chess in mud. But there is another story hiding inside it, a story about the mind. Control is not just something leaders want. It is something they can become addicted to. Napoleon learned early that the world rewards the person who acts certainly. Certainty moves people. Certainty silences doubt. Certainty makes chaos feel temporary. He rose in a time when governments fell like doors in a storm, when alliances shifted, when money vanished, when rumors could do as much damage as cannons. In that kind of world, control is not a luxury. It feels like survival. So Napoleon trained himself to create control. Through speed, through concentration, through relentless attention to details others ignored. But the mind makes a quiet substitution. It starts to believe that because you can control some things, you can control the whole. And when that belief hardens, you stop reading reality. You start reading your own expectations. On that night, with Prussians moving and his army spread, Napoleon is not only commanding troops, he is commanding his own anxiety. And the question is not whether he will act. The question is, when you have built your identity around control, can you ever admit that the world is slipping away? To understand the night he bet everything, you have to understand what control meant to him. Napoleon did not begin as an emperor. He began as a young officer from Corsica, outsider, observed, judged. In France, his accent marked him. His origins marked him. His status marked him. So he found one place where the rules were clean: the military. There, numbers mattered. Timing mattered. Preparation mattered. If you could see faster, move faster, decide faster, you could rise. Napoleon learned to treat uncertainty like an enemy position. You do not admire it. You flank it. He read obsessively. He planned obsessively. He made war a form of administration. People called him lucky, but luck is often what we call someone else's ability to create options. Still, control has a price. The more you rely on it, the more you fear its absence. He could not sleep like other men. He slept in pieces. He woke and returned to the map. He kept information close. He trained his staff to feed him constant updates. That sounds like discipline. It can also be hunger, because every update carries a promise. If you know enough, you can prevent surprise. But what if surprise is not a failure of knowledge? What if surprise is the natural state of war? And if that is true, what happens to a leader who cannot tolerate the natural state of war? Quick recap. Here's what we know so far, and the one detail that still doesn't fit. Everyone remembers the strategy, but not the timing. Why does Napoleon rush certain orders, then freeze for hours, as if he's waiting for one specific signal? Forget the battlefield for a second. Inside Napoleon's headquarters, the real fight is over who gets to define the truth, and one quiet voice is about to win. Napoleon's system worked for years. He moved armies like hands. He struck quickly. He split opponents. He forced them to react. He loved the moment when the enemy became a prisoner of his tempo. That is not just strategy. It is psychology. Tempo creates the feeling of control. When you set the pace, you also set the questions the other side must answer. You get to feel like the author. Napoleon also mastered symbols. The uniform, the pose, the bulletins. He did not only win battles, he curated belief. He understood that armies fight inside their minds before they fight on fields, so he made his soldiers feel seen. He made officers feel chosen. He made France feel protected by his certainty. But certainty has a shadow. When you present yourself as unbreakable, you cannot easily change course. Because change looks like weakness, every public certainty becomes a private trap. And the longer you win, the more the trap tightens. Success trains you to expect reality to continue cooperating. On that night, as he faces a coalition that will not dissolve, a weathered enemy that will not collapse, and an army that is tired, Napoleon is still hearing the echo of his own past victories, and that echo whispers one message: you can still force the world. But can past control become the reason a leader refuses to see present limits? If he's the master planner, why are his closest generals receiving instructions that don't match each other, and who benefits from that confusion? Now we move toward the night itself. It is June 1815. Napoleon has returned from exile. France has rallied. The clock is ruling. Europe's powers do not argue about what to do with him anymore. They agree. They will end him. So Napoleon does what he always does when time is short. He goes on offense. His plan is to strike quickly in Belgium, to separate the British and the Prussians, to defeat them before they can fully combine. It is a plan built for speed and control, but control in war depends on something fragile. Communication. Couriers ride. Orders are written. Maps are interpreted. Roads clog with wagons. Rain turns paths into glue. And every delay multiplies. Napoleon wins at Ligny against the Prussians, not a clean destruction, but a win. He believes they are broken. He believes they will retreat away from Wellington. So he sends Marshal Grouchy to pursue. This is the hinge. This is where the desire for control turns into the need to confirm a story. If the Prussians are running away, his next battle is manageable. If the Prussians are not running away, the next battle becomes a trap. That night, before Waterloo, Napoleon's world depends on which version is true. And if you are Napoleon, which version feels easier to believe? Napoleon keeps repeating the same phrase to different men like it's a spell, but what exactly is he trying to prevent them from thinking? Now reverse it. Imagine Napoleon isn't forcing events at all. Imagine he's being carried by them. And he knows it. The rain falls hard. Not romantic rain. Heavy rain that changes everything. It slows marching. It tires men. It floods low ground. It also delays battle because cannon cannot move like they should through mud. Napoleon waits. Waiting is not his habit. For a man of tempo, waiting feels like losing. He tells himself the delay is rational. He wants the ground to dry enough for artillery, and that is true. But it is also something else. It buys him time to believe his plan is still intact. A leader can use delay like a blanket to keep fear from touching the skin. Inside his headquarters, people watch him. They study his face. They look for signs. Because morale does not only live in numbers, it lives in the leader's calm. Napoleon performs calm. He eats a little. He talks. He issues orders. But every order is also a wager. Every order is also a wager. Every order assumes that Grouchy is doing exactly what Napoleon imagines him doing. That assumption is a psychological move. It is the mind taking a missing piece and filling it with a preferred shape. The British are in front. The Prussians are supposed to be elsewhere. Supposed to be. And in war, supposed to be can kill. So here is the question at the end of this chapter. When the facts are incomplete, does a great commander see more clearly than others? Or does he simply believe his own story more completely? Quick recap. Here's what we know so far, and the one detail that still doesn't fit. The map looks clean, the orders look confident, and yet one missing messenger could collapse the entire design. So why does Napoleon choose the riskiest channel of communication? Morning comes. The battlefield is called Waterloo now, but in the moment it is just geography. A ridge. Farms. Roads. A line of enemy soldiers who do not leave. Wellington has positioned his army with care. He hides men behind the ridge. From Napoleon's view, the enemy looks thinner than it is. Perception matters. It shapes confidence. Napoleon plans to hit the British center, to fix them in place, then break them. He sends attacks toward key strongpoints like Hougoumont and La Haye-Sainte. The fighting is brutal and close, but something is off. The British line bends but does not snap. This is where control becomes a question of interpretation. If the enemy does not break, you can read that as resistance that will soon collapse, or you can read it as a warning. Napoleon keeps reading it as the first. He commits more men. He keeps the Imperial Guard in reserve, the symbol of final control. And in the distance, there is movement. At first, it is not clear. Dust. Dark shapes, sound carrying strangely in wet air. Are those Grouchy's men? Are those Prussians? An army approaching in the distance is not only a tactical fact, it is a psychological shock. Because it challenges the story you are using to stay calm. And here is the question. When a leader's sense of control depends on one assumption, what happens in the mind the moment that assumption starts to wobble? He claims he can predict his enemy's next move. But what if he's actually predicting his own generals and managing them like pieces on the board? Here's the strange part. Napoleon doesn't look like a gambler until you notice what he refuses to check one last time. Napoleon receives reports, conflicting reports. Some say it is Grouchy, some fear it is Bluchy. Napoleon chooses the interpretation that keeps his plan alive. This is not stupidity, it is something the brain does under threat. When fear rises, we narrow our focus. We cling to familiar patterns. We discount information that forces painful change. In psychology, this is not a moral failing. It is a human reflex. But in command, reflex can become catastrophe. Napoleon sends messages. He tries to pull Grouchy back toward the battlefield. But messages take time. Time is the one resource you cannot manufacture, and now the British still hold. The attacks are grinding. The casualties grow. Every minute that passes makes the approaching army more real. Napoleon's control is now competing with reality, and reality has its own momentum. He has a choice. He can shift his plan dramatically, or he can double down and force the breakthrough before the other army arrives. He chooses the breakthrough, because when your identity is built on control, changing course can feel like admitting you never had it. So the question is this: at what point does persistence stop being courage and start being denial? There's a moment when Napoleon stops asking for reports and starts declaring reality. So did he learn something, or did he decide something had to be true? Let's pause the battle for a moment and go inside the psychology. Control feels like safety. When we can predict, we can relax. When we cannot predict, the body treats it like danger. Leaders live inside that danger. So they build routines, systems, habits. They create the illusion of predictability. And those illusions can be useful. They keep teams moving. They prevent paralysis. But they also create a trap called escalation of commitment. It happens when you have invested so much in a plan that abandoning it feels worse than continuing it. The mind says, if I push a little more, the plan will pay off. If I stop now, it means I was wrong. It means the sacrifices were wasted. So you push, you commit more. You keep trying to buy control with resources. At Waterloo, the currency is bodies, and Napoleon has spent heavily already, so he keeps spending, not because he does not see the cost, because he believes the cost will be redeemed by a decisive moment, a single moment that restores the story. This is the dangerous seduction of control. It promises a clean ending. And now the question: if the mind is wired to avoid admitting error, how can any leader tell the difference between a temporary setback and the moment they must change? Quick recap. Here's what we know so far, and the one detail that still doesn't fit. One officer walks into the room, speaks for less than a minute, and leaves with Napoleon suddenly calm. What did he say that mattered more than the battlefield? Stop thinking like a strategist and start thinking like a stage manager, because the next decision is about spectacle, not tactics. Back on the field, the Prussians are not a rumor anymore. They hit Napoleon's right flank. The sound of battle thickens. Now there are two battles pressing against each other. Napoleon is forced to allocate men to contain the new threat. Every unit sent right is a unit not used to break Wellington. And still, he tries to keep the original objective alive. This is control under siege. The mind searches for a lever that will still move everything. Napoleon looks toward the Imperial Guard. The Guard is not just a military unit. It is a psychological device. It holds the army's belief. It holds Napoleon's belief. As long as the Guard is uncommitted, the future feels open. Once the Guard goes in, the future collapses into one line. Napoleon waits, then decides. He sends them forward. He is betting that a final push will shatter Wellington before the Prussians can fully close. This is the moment people remember. The last card. When the last reserve is also the last symbol, is a leader choosing a tactic or trying to rescue their identity? Napoleon famously trusts his instincts, but this night he keeps demanding numbers. So what fear is hiding behind the math? The Imperial Guard advances. The ground is uneven. The smoke is thick. The British hold fire. Then, at close range, the volleys hit. The Guard staggers. They dared staggers. They try to dress ranks, they trying to push, but the British lamplight smite and the guard begins to fall back. This is more than a retreat. It is a shattering of a belief. The guard does not retreat. That is what people think. That is what Napoleon's legend needs. But reality does not care about legends. Word spreads through the French army like cold water. The guard is repulsed. If the guard can be pushed back, then anything can. Men look over shoulders. Units loosen. Control does not disappear all at once. It drains. Then, it collapses. Napoleon tries to stabilize. He tries to rally. He tries to reimpose the story. But now the battlefield is writing its own story. The Prussians press harder. The British press harder. The French line turns into fragments, and Napoleon, the master of tempo, is forced into reaction. Here is the question. When a leader's aura is part of the army's strength, what happens to the whole system when that aura cracks in public? If his plan is inevitable, why does he spend so much time controlling who sees him, who speaks to him, and who gets kept outside the door? One sentence from Napoleon changes the room's temperature, and the cost of that sentence won't be paid until dawn. Napoleon leaves the field, not with a dramatic speech, not with a final pose. He leaves because he must, and now the bet is paid. The empire is not just endangered, it is finished. In the aftermath, people will argue about tactics, about the weather, about Grouchy, about timing. All true, all important. But beneath those details is the psychology of control. Napoleon built a machine that depended on his ability to impose order on uncertainty. At Waterloo, uncertainty did not yield. It multiplied. The system could not absorb it, because the system was too centered on one mind. That is the dark side of personal control. It creates speed. It also creates brittleness. A brittle system looks strong until it is touched the wrong way. And the question here is not only about Napoleon, it is about any leader. How much control can a single person hold before the organization becomes an extension of their fears? Quick recap. Here's what we know so far, and the one detail that still doesn't fit. A single rumor moves faster than cavalry, and Napoleon knows it. So why does he let one specific rumor spread unchecked through the ranks? Let's talk about why control is so intoxicating. Control reduces anxiety. It gives the brain a reward. When you act and the world responds, dopamine follows. Not because you are evil, because you are human. For Napoleon, control was not only a leadership style, it was emotional regulation. A way to keep doubt from flooding him. And for years it worked. His decisions shaped Europe. His confidence changed outcomes. So the brain learned a lesson. When I control, I survive. When I control, I win. But brains can overlearn. They can treat one strategy as universal. That is when control becomes compulsive. Compulsive control cannot tolerate ambiguity. It mistakes ambiguity for disrespect, for disloyalty, for chaos that must be crushed. It becomes harder to delegate, harder to listen, harder to accept that other people have perspectives you do not. And the world does not stop being complex just because a leader needs it to be simple. Waterloo is an example of complexity refusing to be simplified. So here is the question. If control is a coping mechanism, what does a leader do when the coping mechanism stops working? He's betting everything on obedience, not bravery. And the question is, what happens when obedience runs out before the battle does? We're going to zoom in on one overlooked detail, a delay measured in minutes. And it's the delay that nearly breaks everything. One of the strangest things about that night before Waterloo is not what Napoleon did. It is what he could not do. He could not fully accept that the Prussians might rejoin Wellington. He had evidence, he had warnings. But the plan required a certain world, so his mind kept returning to that world. This is confirmation bias. We search for information that supports what we already believe. We dismiss information that threatens it. And in a crisis, confirmation bias gets stronger. Because the emotional stakes rise, Napoleon had tied his return to France to one thing: a quick victory. A demonstration that he was still inevitable. So any information that said, "You are not inevitable," carried a psychic cost. It threatened not only the campaign, it threatened the self. When the self is threatened, the mind defends. It explains away. It delays. It rationalizes. It picks the interpretation that hurts less, until pain arrives anyway, not as an idea, as Prussian infantry, as British volleys, as retreat, as collapse. So here is the question. If the mind defends the self by distorting reality, how can any leader build a system that forces reality back into view? Napoleon's greatest weapon isn't artillery, it's certainty. But where did he get his certainty from, on a night when nobody could see the full picture? After Waterloo, Napoleon's world shrinks fast. He returns to Paris, politics turns cold, allies hesitate, support evaporates, control, which once felt endless, becomes a room with fewer doors. And this is another psychology lesson. Control is often borrowed. It is given by others, by soldiers who obey, by ministers who comply, by citizens who believe. When belief fades, control fades. Napoleon tries to manage the situation. He considers options. He weighs escape, but the network that made him powerful is no longer his. The coalition closes in. France is exhausted. And now the man who once moved continents must negotiate with time. He eventually surrenders, not in a blaze, in a decision, a leader choosing the least humiliating loss. And the loss is final. The psychology of control has a final cruelty. It convinces you that if you can just find the right lever, you can reverse everything. But history does not offer unlimited reversals. So the question, when control fails, what does it take for a leader to stop searching for levers and start accepting limits? Napoleon is sent away, exile again, this time far enough that return is not a plan. On St. Helena, the world cannot be forced. The island does not care. The ocean does not care. The ocean does not care. He becomes, for perhaps the first time in his adult life, a man without a battlefield. He tells stories. He dictates memoirs. He shapes the narrative. Because even in exile, he seeks control. He cannot control events. So he controls meaning. This is a common move. When people lose power, they fight for interpretation. They fight for the story that will be remembered. Napoleon's legend is not an accident. It is a continuation of his strategy by other means. But legend is also a comfort. If you can explain the fall as betrayal, as weather, as fate, then you do not have to face the possibility that your own need for control led you into a situation no control could solve. And that brings us to the last question. If a leader can control the story after losing control of reality, what does it take for any of us to face the parts of our own minds that would rather be right than be honest?